Hello students, a very good evening to all of you. Welcome to my channel. This is a very important class on postmodern writers, and today we will talk about two major novelists, Kingsley Amis and John Fowles. But before starting, I want to give you a brief introduction about myself. My name is Brishti Mukherjee. I have qualified NTA UGC NET exam in English literature 4 times and have also qualified West Bengal SET examination. I have 2 years of teaching experience. Moreover, I have also taught in NPTEL online course from IIT Madras 3 times. So that is all about myself. This is the link of my Telegram channel. So those of you who have not joined yet, please join to get notification of all important classes. And also please don't forget to like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel so that many more new learners can join. Good evening Neha, good evening Vishal, good evening Shushmita, welcome. These are the timings of the classes, Monday to Friday at 8:30 p.m, Saturday, Sunday off. So don't forget to join me live. Please subscribe the channel and press the bell icon to get notifications. Okay, so today we will talk about two major writers, Kingsley Amis and John Fowles. So we will start with Kingsley Amis. We have already discussed Martin Amis and today we will talk about Kingsley Amis. So Kingsley Amis, his timeline is 1922 to 1995. Good evening, Gourango. Welcome. So Kingsley Amis, his full name was Sir Kingsley William Amis. He was born on 16th April 1922 in London. He was the father of Martin Amis. We have already discussed Martin Amis and today we are discussing his father. And very importantly, he was a lifelong friend of Philip Larkin, and you all know Philip Larkin, Ted Hughes, both are part of movement poets. Okay, so or movement poetry. So this man, Kingsley Amis, he was also an angry young man, obviously associated with Osborne and others. And at the same time, he was also closely associated with movement poetry, and he was a very good friend of Philip Larkin. His biographer was Zachary Leader. So remember the name Zachary Leader was his biographer. He was educated at City of London School. He was also studied at St. John's College, Oxford. He was married to Hilary Bardwell. Okay, Hilary Bardwell. He was married to Hilary Bardwell. And he also served as a lecturer at University College of Swansea. He also served as a lecturer at University College of Swansea. Good evening, Shupriyo. Welcome. And he was, as I have already said, he was also the member of Angry Young Man group. He also served as a visiting fellow in creative writing at Princeton University. So कई सारे काम उन्होंने किया है. He had a varied or variety, full of varieties. His career is full of varieties. He later falls in love with Elizabeth Howard, who was a novelist. He was knighted in 1990, that is important. And if we talk about his political views, then he was the supporter of Labour Party. And with that support, supporting the Labour Party actually, he also wrote an essay. His essay का नाम था Why Lucky Jim Turned Right, published in 1967. That was the essay basically talking about his opinion on Labour Party and why he supported Labour Party. So एक political essay है Why Lucky Jim Turned Right, published in 1967. Okay, so yes, so that is about his biographical details. तो इसमें important चीज है कि he was a member of Angry Young Man group, and ये जो essay मैंने बताया, though it's a minor work, still important because it is talking about his political views. अच्छा, इसके आगे हमने बताया कि obviously he was the father of Martin Amis, that is important. Name of the biographer is important, and he was a lifelong friend of Philip Larkin, so closely associated with movement poetry, that is important. Okay. So that is about his biographical details and his career. Now we move on to his major novels. तो उसके novels में दो ही novels हैं जो major novels है. One is Lucky Jim. Okay, so we will start with Lucky Jim, published in 1954. This is a very famous novel and often prescribed in your syllabus also. So Lucky Jim, Kingsley Amis's most important work, and it is also a kind of in that sense, angry young man novel. Okay, so it was the debut novel Lucky Jim, and it was also campus novel. Okay, good evening, Cherry. Welcome. So it was his debut novel. Publisher was Victor Gollancz. Okay, and it won Somerset Maugham Award for Fiction in 1955. Uh, Good evening, Kriti. Welcome. And very importantly, this novel was dedicated to Philip Larkin. As I have already told you, he was a lifelong friend of Larkin. So this particular novel, his debut novel, Lucky Jim, it was dedicated to Philip Larkin. And obviously, it has some autobiographical touch. ओके तो अब हम प्लॉट में आते हैं इसका प्लॉट क्या है मेन प्रोटैगनिस्ट है ऑब्वियसली जिम डिक्सन इज द मेन कैरेक्टर हु इज द रिलक्टेंट लेक्चरर is a lecturer but not so passionate to teach. Okay, so that is the protagonist, and this is very important. The surname Dixon is actually derived from Larkin's home address, so that is why it is dedicated to Larkin. Okay, so that is dedicated to Larkin. So the surname Dixon is derived from Larkin's address, 12 Dixon Drive, Leicester. Okay, 12 Dixon Drive, Leicester. That was the home address of Philip Larkin. And this particular uh, surname of Dixon is derived from that. So that is why important. Okay, now Jim Dixon, as I have already told you, he is a reluctant lecturer in medieval history at Red Brick University. Okay, he is a lecturer in medieval history at Red Brick University. He is trying to achieve a permanent post. Okay, तो जिम डिक्सन ही इज एक्चुअली मतलब वो एक टेम्पोररी पोस्ट में है. ठीक है, तो वो क्या कोशिश कर रहे हैं, वो अपने पोस्ट को परमानेंट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. ही इज ट्राइंग टू अचीव अ परमानेंट पोस्ट with the help of the HOD, the head of the department, Ned Welch. Okay, so that is important. He is trying to get a permanent post with the help of the HOD Ned Welch. Now he is on the way to publish his first scholarly article. वो paper publish कर रहे हैं, so it was his first publication. But he later found that his article is published in Italian language by the editor and in his own name. इसका मतलब क्या है कि जहां पर उन्होंने आर्टिकल को पब्लिश किया, मतलब जहां पर उन्होंने भेजा था आर्टिकल को, वो एडिटर ने उसको प्लेजियराइज किया. So Jim Dixon has written that article in English language, but the publisher translated the same article in Italian language and published it in his own name. मतलब publisher पूरा का पूरा content को plagiarize करके अपने नाम से किसी दूसरे जर्नल में पब्लिश किया. ठीक है, सो फेक पब्लिशर था एक्चुअली, सो दैट इज व्हाई अ काइंड ऑफ प्लेजरिज्म इज देयर. So he later found that the same article which he has sent in English language, it was translated into Italian language by the editor, and the editor published it in his own name. Okay, now Dixon falls in love with his colleague Margaret Peel. She is recovering from suicide attempts. She is recovering from suicide attempts. Margaret Peel, she is a very depressed woman, and she is trying to recover herself from suicide attempts. Now, Margaret Peel is a very dangerous girl. Dixon is constantly blackmailed by Peel, and in a musical weekend, he gets drunk and drops a lighted cigarette on the bed. Okay, in a musical weekend, he gets drunk and drops a lighted cigarette on the bed. So that is a wrong thing which Jim has done. Now later he meets Christine Callaghan, a young Londoner. She is the present girlfriend of Professor Welch's son. Professor Welch कौन है? मैंने अभी बताया कि he was the head of the department of Jim's college. Professor Welch's son has the girlfriend Christine Callaghan, and Jim later meets with that young lady. He gives a lecture on Merry England. तो ये क्वेश्चन में आ सकता है कि उसके लेक्चर का टॉपिक क्या था. टॉपिक था मेरी इंग्लैंड, एंड वो भी इन एन इंटॉक्सिकेटेड स्टेट. He delivers a lecture on Merry England in an intoxicated condition, and in that particular lecture, he is talking about Merry England, but at the same time, he is insulting his colleagues. Okay, and finally, Dixon is free to pursue Christine. who was actually the girlfriend of Professor Welch's son. Okay, so that is why Lucky Jim, very matlab, lucky in the sense that he's receiving all these things, and finally he is doing anything, he is doing whatever he wants to do. Okay, so that is why Lucky Jim. It is also a campus novel because main characters देखो वो कॉलेज के लेक्चरर है, डिपार्टमेंट के एचओडी, जो भी मतलब यूनिवर्सिटी कॉलेज के साथ एसोसिएटेड चीजें हैं वो मेन कैरेक्टर है कैंपस नॉवल में. So in that sense, it is also an example of campus novel, and that is the most important, most famous novel of Kingsley Amis. Okay, now we move on to his next novel, that is The Old Devils. These two novels are basically important. The Old Devils, published in 1986. The Old Devils. Okay. Now, this particular novel, The Old Devils, it won the prize in 1986. Won the prize, matlab won the Booker Prize in 1986. Okay, so that is why important. It won the Booker Prize in 1986. It was considered as his masterpiece by his son Martin Amis. So Martin Amis, his own son, considered this novel, The Old Devils, as the masterpiece of his father. तो इसमें मेन कैरेक्टर क्या है? एलन वीवर इज द मेन कैरेक्टर, हु इज अ राइटर, returns to his native land with his wife Rhiannon, ex-girlfriend of his friend Peter. Okay, so Alan Weaver, who is a writer, who returns to his native land with his wife Rhiannon. Okay, and Rhiannon was actually the ex-girlfriend of Peter. Okay, now while drinking in a party, Alan dies. Alan Weaver, yes, a Booker Prize. Alan Weaver, who is the writer, who he finally dies while drinking in a party. His friends, including Peter, are taking reminiscences of their brief reunion. So his friend Peter is taking reminiscences of their brief reunion. तो पास्ट में जो रियूनियन हुआ था उसके बारे में वो लोग रिकॉल कर रहे हैं अपनी बात. ठीक है, अच्छा. तो यही है बेसिकली इसका प्लॉट, द ओल्ड डेविल्स, पब्लिश्ड इन 1986, एंड दिस इज बेसिकली टॉकिंग अबाउट द कैरेक्टर एलन वीवर. ये शायद बहुत पहले एक बार नेट एग्जाम में क्वेश्चन आया था कि एलन वीवर कौन सी नॉवेल का कैरेक्टर है, तो याद रखना ये किंग्सली एमिस के नॉवेल है द ओल्ड डेविल्स. ओके, अच्छा. नेक्स्ट हम आते हैं उसके कुछ अदर वर्क्स में जो कि माइनर वर्क्स है. So I like it here. It is another novel published in 1958. Then Black and White, that is the unfinished work. New Maps of Hill, a survey of science fiction, that is a series of lectures. तो बस टाइटल को याद रखना. This is unfinished. That is why it is important. कभी-कभी unfinished work से भी क्वेश्चन आते हैं. And another work is That Uncertain Feeling, published in 1955. Okay. So these are the major novels or major works written by Kingsley Amis. Okay. Now we move on to our next and last writer of today's class, that is John Fowles, 1926 to 2005. He is also a very, very important postmodern novelist. Okay, John Fowles. So John Fowles में his full name was John Robert Fowles. ठीक है. He was born on 31st March 1926 in United Kingdom, and he was greatly influenced by Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, he was greatly influenced by them. He studied at Oxford University, and he also worked as an English teacher at a school on the Greek island of Spetses. Okay, तो ये उनके बायोग्राफिकल डिटेल्स में है. He worked as an English teacher. He studied at Oxford University. And ये देखो जो दोनों पर्सन के नाम मैंने बताया, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, both are existential philosophers. Existential philosophers. Okay, and in John Fowles's works, he will also find elements of existentialism. He was enrolled in a naval course at Edinburgh University. तो नेवी में भी उनका ट्रेनिंग था. ठीक है. And he was served as a curator of the Lyme Regis Museum from 1979 to 1988. This experience is very, very important because based on that experience, he wrote his most famous novel, The French Lieutenant's Work. His first wife Elizabeth dies of cancer, and he later marries Sarah Smith. एंड सारा स्मिथ का जो कैरेक्टर है ये बहुत सारे क्रिटिक्स ने आइडेंटिफाई किया है कि दिस कैरेक्टर इज एक्चुअली द मॉडल फॉर सारा उद्रुप इन फ्रेंच लेफ्टिनेंट्स वुमन। ओके, तो सारा स्मिथ। अच्छा, नेक्स्ट हम आते हैं उसके नॉवेल्स में। तो उसके दो तीन नॉवेल्स बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। फर्स्ट वन इज द कलेक्टर, पब्लिश्ड इन 1963। द कलेक्टर, so collector, it is actually a thriller novel which is divided into three parts. Okay, thriller novel divided into three parts, and the main character is a lonely man. तो एज देखो पोस्ट मॉडर्न नॉवेल्स में ये आप सब जानते हो कि लोनलीनेस, फ्रैगमेंटेशन, पैरोडी, पास्टेज, ये सारे के सारे चीजें होता है। तो मेन कैरेक्टर ऑब्वियसली एक लोनली मैन बहुत ही जस्टिफाइड है। So Frederick Clegg is the name of the man who is a lonely man. He is actually a clerk, but his hobby is to collect butterflies. ठीक है, तो वो क्लार्क की जॉब करता है, but his hobby is to collect butterflies. Now Clegg is very much obsessed with Miranda Grey. Now remember this Miranda, the name is actually obviously taken from the Tempest. उसका reference भी है आगे। तो Clegg is obsessed with Miranda Grey. एंड मिरांडा ग्रे कौन है? शी इज एन आर्ट स्टूडेंट एट द स्लेड स्कूल ऑफ फाइन आर्ट। तो आर्ट स्कूल में वो पढ़ती है मिरांडा। एंड क्लेग इज वेरी मच ऑब्सेस्ड विथ मिरांडा ग्रे। ओके, क्लेग एडमायर्स हर फ्रॉम अ डिस्टेंस। Clegg admires her from a distance. Okay, so Clegg, he is obsessed with Miranda Gray, but वो from a distance Miranda को admire करते हैं. Clegg later wins the prize in football pools. Okay, he leaves his job and buys a house in the countryside. Now Clegg decides to captivate Miranda in the list of pretty things. तो क्लेग एज ही इज वेरी मच ऑब्सेस्ड विथ मिरांडा, तो उसके दिमाग में हमेशा ये बात चलती है कि आई नीड टू गेट मिरांडा। ठीक है, तो वो फोर्सफुली मिरांडा को अपने पास में लेना चाहते हैं, एंड दैट इज व्हाई ही डिसाइड्स टू कैप्टिवेट मिरांडा। ही डिसाइड्स टू किडनैप मिरांडा इन द लिस्ट ऑफ प्रिटी थिंग्स। मतलब उसके पास जो ब्यूटीफुल थिंग्स का लिस्ट है, एज हिज हॉबी वाज टू कलेक्ट बटरफ्लाई, राइट। तो बटरफ्लाईज कलेक्ट करना मतलब बहुत ही जो खूबसूरत चीजें हैं उसके साथ उनका बहुत अच्छा एसोसिएशन है। So Clegg decides to captivate Miranda in the list of pretty things, and he locks her up in the cellar of his house. Okay, तो वो फाइनली उनको किडनैप करके लाते हैं and locks her up in the cellar of his house. Finally, Clegg is very much disturbed and promises to let her go after 1 month. So as it was obviously an obsession, तो ग्रेजुअली ऑब्सेशन कट जाते हैं एंड क्लेग इज वेरी मच डिस्टर्ब्ड विद मिरांडा एंड प्रॉमिसेस टू लेट हर गो आफ्टर 1 मंथ। ही प्रॉमिसेस टू डू एवरीथिंग फॉर हर बट ही विल नॉट मोलेस्ट हर। ये भी वो प्रॉमिस कर रहे हैं कि ही विल नॉट मोलेस्ट हर। ओके, नाउ द सेकंड पार्ट इज नैरेटेड बाय मिरांडा इन फॉर्म ऑफ अ डायरी। तो दोनों पार्ट है नॉवेल में। सेकंड पार्ट में हम मिरांडा की नैरेशन देखते हैं इन द फॉर्म ऑफ अ डायरी। She wrote some letters inside her diary to her sister and a mysterious man called Mr. GP. ठीक है, तो डायरी में वो कुछ लेटर्स लिखते हैं। Now Mr. GP कौन है? He is an artist and Miranda greatly admires him. Okay, now she knows that once he will definitely love her. So Miranda greatly admires Mr. GP and Miranda is hopeful that once Mr. GP will definitely love her. मिरांडा कंपेयर्स क्लेग विथ कैलिबन। तो यहाँ पर टेम्पेस्ट का डायरेक्ट रेफरेंस आते हैं। कैलिबन यू ऑल नो, द फेमस कैरेक्टर इन टेम्पेस्ट। ठीक है, सो मिरांडा कंपेयर्स क्लेग विथ कैलिबन। क्लेग इज रिफ्यूज टू रिलीज हर। ओके, नाउ शी फैंटासाइजेस टू किल क्लेग बट रेस्ट्रेन्स लेटर। तो वो फैंटेसी कर रहे हैं कि शी विल किल क्लेग बट लेटर शी रेस्ट्रेन्स। Now finally Miranda dies. Clegg wants to commit suicide after Miranda's death because his obsession is lost now. But before that he reads Miranda's diary. Before that means before committing suicide, he comes across Miranda's diary and he finally realizes that Miranda never loved him. तो ये जानने के बाद क्या होता है? Clegg changes his decision and decides to abduct another girl. So that is how the novel ends. The collector, that is why collector is the title. So his job is to collect beautiful things, beautiful girls, beautiful जो भी चीजें उनको अच्छा लगता है वही चीजें वो कलेक्ट करते हैं। ठीक है, so that is about the collector. अच्छा, नेक्स्ट वर्क पे हम आते हैं द मैगस। published in 1965. The Magus. So Magus is actually talking about an aspiring poet and a young student जिसका नाम है Nicholas Urfe. Nicholas Urfe is a young Oxford graduate and an aspiring poet. He gets the job of a teacher in a small school. Okay. Now later he falls in love with Alison Kelly. Later he joins as a teacher in Lord Byron School. ये स्कूल का ही नाम है, ठीक है, Lord Byron School. He becomes very much bored, depressed and overwhelmed by the Mediterranean island. तो ये जो उनकी जॉब है Lord Byron School में, during that job जो मेडिटेरेनियन आइलैंड, मेडिटेरेनियन सी का जो एटमोस्फियर है, उससे वो बहुत ही डिप्रेस्ड हो जाते हैं, ओवरवेल्म्ड हो जाते हैं, बोर्ड हो जाते हैं, ठीक है. Later what happens that he meets the owner of the island जिसका नाम है Maurice Conchis, and he is very much fascinated by Conchis's mysterious persona. Okay, now he loses his ability to determine what is real and what is artifice. तो ये fascination के बाद क्या होता है कि the distinction between reality and art or the distinction between reality and fantasy ये उनके दिमाग में blur हो जाते हैं, ठीक है. So, and basically it is considered as a metafictional quest story which is parallel to the Tempest and also the Odyssey. ठीक है, तो इन दोनों बुक के साथ ज्यादा से ज्यादा पैरेलल हम करते हैं इस स्टोरी को, द मैगस. So basically it is talking about the transformation in the character of Nicholas Urfe, who is a young student and an aspiring poet, and how from his depressed state he transforms himself into a kind of मतलब उसके दिमाग में जो एक चीजें चल रहा है, द डिस्टिंक्शन बिटवीन रियलिटी एंड आर्ट, तो उसी के ऊपर ये पूरा का पूरा नॉवेल. Okay, now the last work of today's class which we are going to discuss, the most famous novel of this man John Fowles, that is the French Lieutenant's Woman. ये ज्यादा से ज्यादा syllabus में होता है, ठीक है. It's a very long novel but very beautifully written. So French Lieutenant's Woman published in 1969, and this novel is very famously known as historiographic metafiction. The term was first coined by Linda Hutcheon. ओके, तो बहुत ही फेमस टर्म है हिस्टोरियोग्राफिक मेटाफिक्शन, इस नॉवेल को कहा जाता है. एंड एज आई हैव ऑलरेडी टोल्ड यू दैट जॉन फाउल्स वर्कड इन द म्यूजियम ऑफ लाइम रेजिस, तो वो एक्सपीरियंस का यहाँ पर काम किया. So this novel is also set in Lyme Regis and it was a Victorian style romance. Okay, so basically it was a screenplay written by Harold Pinter. मतलब इस नॉवेल का screenplay लिखा था Harold Pinter ने, ठीक है. So each chapter begins with an epigraph and the first chapter is taken from the riddle by Thomas Hardy. Okay, first chapter is taken from the riddle by Thomas Hardy. तो epigraph का source याद रखना. अब इसका प्लॉट क्या है? चार्ल्स स्मिथसन is the main character who is a paleontologist. Charles Smithson, who is a paleontologist. Okay, now Charles Smithson, he is engaged to marry Ernestina Freeman, his beloved. Now during his duty at Lyme Regis, Charles meets a lonely woman, जो कि नॉवेल का मेन कैरेक्टर है. meets a lonely woman जिसका नाम है सारा उद्रुप. सारा उद्रुप इज द कैरेक्टर, तो मेन कैरेक्टर है नॉवेल का, मेन हीरोइन है नॉवेल का सारा उद्रुप, ठीक है. सो चार्ल्स मीट्स दिस लोनली वुमन सारा उद्रुप. नाउ सारा वाज हायर्ड बाय मिसेस पॉल्टेनी टू नर्स अ फ्रेंच लेफ्टिनेंट. ओके, Sarah was hired by Mrs. Poulteney to nurse a French lieutenant. Metafiction, Gorango, metafiction means a fiction about a fiction. ठीक है, तो एक नॉवेल के अंदर अगर हम कोई दूसरा स्टोरी बताते हैं, दूसरे मतलब पर्सन जो कोई पर्टिकुलर चीजें लिख रहा है, ऐसा कुछ स्टोरी है, जैसे प्ले विद इन ए प्ले है, वैसे ही है मेटाफिक्शन. एंड हिस्टोरियोग्राफिक मेटाफिक्शन क्यों? बिकॉज दिस नॉवेल हैज अ हिस्टोरिकल बैकग्राउंड, ठीक है. So that is why meta. तो metafiction basically means fiction about fiction. अगर एक बात में हम कहें, okay. So Sarah was hired by Mrs. Poulteney to nurse a French lieutenant. The man escapes without marrying Sarah. तो सारा का जो स्टोरी है, she is actually the French lieutenant's woman. तो सारा क्या करते हैं, मतलब एक फ्रेंच लेफ्टिनेंट के साथ उनका मैरिज होना फिक्स था, but the man escapes without marrying Sarah. And now Sarah is waiting for this particular man. While searching for fossils, Charles meets Sarah again. Okay, later what happens that Sarah often walks in the undercliff. ये एक particular lonely place है undercliff जिसके ऊपर सारा हमेशा रहते हैं. She is waiting for the return of that particular man, French lieutenant. Now everyone, including Ernestina's aunt, Mrs. Tranter, visits Poulteney's house. Okay. Now Charles's servant Sam falls in love with Mary, who is actually Mrs. Tranter's maid. तो कई सारे characters हैं novel. Then Dr. Grogan arrives and Charles discusses with him about Sarah. So Sarah is very depressed, very lonely lady and very mysterious. So Charles's uncle Robert declares that after his marriage, Charles will not inherit anything. ठीक है. सो चार्ल्स के अंकल ने क्या बताया था कि आफ्टर हिज मैरिज, मतलब रॉबर्ट का जब मैरिज हो जाएगा, उसके अंकल का जब मैरिज हो जाएगा, देन चार्ल्स विल नॉट इनहेरिट एनीथिंग. सो चार्ल्स इज वेरी मच अफ्रेड ऑफ दैट एंड ही इज आल्सो वेरी मच अफ्रेड ऑफ सारा दैट शी मे कमिट सुसाइड. ठीक है. तो वो दोनों चीज से ही बहुत परेशान. Now Grogan tells him that some women wound themselves in order to manipulate others. तो Grogan कह रहे हैं कि सारा के अंदर ये टेंडेंसीज है एंड कुछ पर्सन का ये एक फैसिनेशन होता है कि दे यूज टू ब्लैकमेल अदर्स बाय wounding themselves. ठीक है. So Charles is also very much afraid of that. Now later Charles visits the club and gets drunk. He hires a prostitute who reminds him of Sarah. ठीक है. He hires a prostitute. Now this novel is very very important for the three different endings. कई सारे endings हैं इनका. One is Charles marries Ernestina. ठीक है, एक हैप्पी एंडिंग. दूसरे एंडिंग में बताया जा रहा है चार्ल्स सक्सेसफुली रिसीव सारा. तो चार्ल्स के साथ सारा का जो रिलेशनशिप है वो सक्सेसफुली कंटिन्यू हो रहा है. एंड थर्ड एंडिंग में बताया गया है चार्ल्स स्पेंड्स हिज लाइफ अलोन विदाउट एनी पार्टनर लाइक अ कास्ट. ठीक है. सो दैट इज एक्चुअली एंडिंग. ये तीन एंडिंग्स एंड ये बहुत बार क्वेश्चन में आया है कि विच पोस्ट मॉडर्न नॉवेल्स हैव थ्री एंडिंग्स. सो दैट इज दिस पर्टिकुलर नॉवेल द फ्रेंच लेफ्टिनेंट्स वुमन. ओके. तो ये था जॉन फाउल्स के मेजर वर्क्स. अदर वर्क्स में आते हैं द एबोनी टावर कलेक्शन ऑफ 5 नॉवेल्स. ओके. द ट्री विच इज एन ऑटोबायोग्राफिकल वर्क. देन आते हैं मंतीसा published in 1982 which is an imaginary dialogue between a writer and his own self. ठीक है. और वर्क्स है शिपरेक published in 1974, डैनियल मार्टिन in 1977 and a maggot in 1985. Okay, so these are the major works written by John Fowles. Okay, so that is the end of today's class. Thank you all for joining. This is the link of my Telegram channel. Those of you who have not joined yet, please join to get notification of all important classes. So tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. we will talk about Marxism or Marxist theory. ठीक है. कल हम मार्क्सिस्ट थ्योरी को पढ़ेंगे. So don't forget to join me live. Please subscribe the channel and press the bell icon to get notification. Okay, so thank you all. Bye bye everyone. Good night. See you all tomorrow at 8:30 p.m.